The dog you're looking at is named Mack, and he was involved with one of the most unusual homicide cases from the early 90s. Not only was this case the first of its kind in all of human history, but it has some twists in it that I'm curious as to whether or not you'll see coming. So I'll tell you everything, but as usual, let's get into the backstories first. Angela Dolly Kaplan was a 28-year-old woman who still had most of her life ahead of her. Like anyone else at her age, she had big dreams, and in Angela's case, she was fortunate enough to have a loving family who cared about her deeply. Her oldest daughter, who was 8 years old during the event we're about to discuss, has fond memories of hugs and cuddles, watching movies, baking cookies, and having Christmas with her mother. She was by all accounts a great mom. But on the night of September 2nd, 1992, poor Angela was about to find herself in a very devastating situation, and it's one that for the time was completely unheard of. On this night, Angela was allegedly outside walking when a random stray dog pursued her and began viciously attacking her. Angela was completely stunned, and before long, this dog had knocked her to the ground and completely taken over. She was screaming and screaming, but no one came to help, and she really feared for a period of time that this was going to be it for her. But somehow, she managed to break away from the dog while it still tried chasing after her, and she made it back home, which wasn't too far from the scene. After making it back to her place, a 911 call was made. It was early morning, and on the line was Jeffrey Mann, Angela's long-term partner. His voice was very shaken as he told the operator what I'd already told you, that Angela had been attacked by a stray dog. And according to Mann, the attack happened outside, and Angela somehow made it back home after being mauled. The dispatcher sent emergency responders immediately. When paramedics and police got to the house in Cleveland, they were met with a shocking scene. Angela was inside, laying on the couch, suffering from devastating injuries and draped in some sheets. And she was covered in bites. Legal documents later stated that there were more than 70 bite wounds, and some reports say even more than 100. First responders, of course, tried to save her, but it was too late at this point in time, and so she was unfortunately pronounced deceased at the scene. Now, if you've picked up that something about this story just feels off, well, you're not the only one. When first responders began looking over the scene, things started to appear suspicious to them. See, at first, officers focused on what Mann had told them, that a stray dog was responsible. But as they examined the home, that story started to fall apart. There were no signs outside that pointed to a violent attack happening somewhere else, like nothing. No red trail, no evidence of an outdoor struggle, and no sign of a vicious dog. Instead, everything about that scene suggested that the attack took place inside. Like, there was clear crime scene evidence in a completely different room. In fact, the lead homicide investigator for this crime, Mike Italiano, recalls noticing just how clear it was that this was an attempted cover-up. And then, investigators learned something very critical. Jeffrey Mann owned a pit bull named Mack, a 70-pound dog that was in the home when they arrived. Mack was quickly secured and removed from the house while detectives worked to figure out exactly what had happened, but this is when the focus shifted completely. It went from an unknown stray to the possibility that the dog living in the home was involved. And noticing that they were getting suspicious, Jeffrey now started to claim that Angela actually jumped onto the couch and startled Mack, causing him to attack her. He was already changing his story. And then at some point, he even said that he took some sleeping medication while it happened, and while he was out, another random dog broke in the house and went after her. And I know none of this is funny, I just have to clarify, I'm laughing at picturing a dog breaking into a house. Like, the fact that he thought police would ever believe this, you have to admit is pretty embarrassing. Nonetheless, Angela was also on a tarp and draped in sheets, and she'd clearly been there for hours already. None of this was making sense, and law enforcement knew they had to start getting to work. And so, over the next several weeks, the case was built piece by piece, and a main theory emerged. Mikey, her team, as well as the PD's master dog trainer, started to wonder if maybe Mack was a trained dog, and that Jeffrey had ordered him to do this to Angela. Perhaps this wasn't just some random attack after all. Benjamin McPeak, the master trainer, said that as soon as the warden took Mack into the yard, the dog was very social. He didn't appear aggressive or anything at all, and Mr. McPeak said there were no signs of fear or stress in the dog. Basically, he was just being a good boy. But when McPeak pulled out one of his training sleeves, the dog bite protection ones, Mack immediately became aggressive and turned into a different dog. This happened the second he saw the sleeve, and we can see this in some footage from the show When Animals Attack. From this point, McPeak claimed that there was no doubt in his mind that he had been trained to do attack work. And that's what they went with. Prosecutors would later argue that this wasn't a freak accident. They claimed that after an argument that night, Jeffrey Mann deliberately ordered Mack to attack Angela. In court, testimony indicated that the wounds and crime scene patterns supported the idea of an indoor dog attack, not a random walk on the street. The depth of the injuries also matched the size of Mack's teeth. When the case went to trial in late 1993, it drew national attention because of how rare such a situation was, and many of you may even remember this being on the news. In trial, the jury heard about the number of injuries Angela suffered and how investigators pieced together what happened inside that house. Jeffrey Mann stuck to his story, that he never commanded the dog and that Angela's death was a tragic accident. But the evidence told a different story, and after deliberating, the jury returned a guilty verdict for murder. The judge sentenced Jeffrey Mann to 15 years to life in prison and fined him $5,000. Mack, the dog involved in the attack, was held as evidence during the trial and then euthanized afterward, which was required under Ohio law at the time when a dog had killed a human. This case set a pretty significant legal milestone. It's actually believed to be the first time in history that someone was convicted of murder for using a dog as a weapon. Appeals followed, but they didn't change the outcome. Fortunately, in the decades since, this case hasn't faded from memory. Every single time Jeffrey Mann has come up for parole, Angela's family and the detective who worked on the case, Mike Italiano, showed up to oppose his release. I absolutely love this man. I was looking for updates and just kept seeing them fight to keep him in. It made me respect their dedication. I initially found this through my friend Don Holbert, who sent me the When Animals Attack episode from way back, so I was pleasantly surprised to continually see Italiano making appearances and defending the family. As recently as 2023, she showed up helping to keep him behind bars and said he should spend his life in the penitentiary. It was an exceptional, cruel murder. And to be honest, there's no one who I'd trust more than the person who was on scene that day. I'm sure this woman has seen a lot of things, so that says something. Angela's mother is still devastated to this day. It's really sad to see. It was her only daughter, but she's been fighting since it happened, and it is incredibly admirable to see her strength. Angela's oldest daughter, Nicole, who was 8 at the time, is now 13 years older than her mom was when she was taken away from her. And in her words, age is a privilege that she was denied. Rest in peace to Angela Dolly Kaplan, and my heart goes out to her family. Alright, so this one is ongoing, but it's made me very upset. And just a fair warning, it'll probably make you pretty upset as well. There's nothing visually graphic or anything like that. It's just very, very unfair and very tragic. I usually try not to cover things that are so recent, but it's one of those cases where what has happened and the details are very clear. So my goal here above everything is to bring awareness to this family's situation. The story begins in August 2025 with a family named the Cristillos from Ontario, Canada. The family consists of 35-year-old Andrew, the husband and father, Christina, the wife and mother, and their 3 daughters, 7-year-old Leah, 6-year-old Chloe, and 4-year-old Ella. These 2 parents absolutely adore their girls, and the family was by all means thriving, but unfortunately at some point recently, the girl's mother, Christina, was actually diagnosed with advanced breast cancer. And before long, the center of Andrew's focus now had to be standing with Christina and staying strong for his kids, the center of his world. This was a fight that many families have experienced, and it was one that had taken a tremendous toll on the family, both emotionally and financially. But Andrew had stood by her side through every hospital visit and every uncertain night. He was adamant that they were going to get through this together. Friends describe him as someone who never gives up and someone who would do anything to keep his family together through what felt like an endless storm. So while Christina gave it her all to get through this immense struggle, Andrew became the anchor. He worked tirelessly and did everything possible to keep stability in their home and to keep the girls in great spirits. People close to him said his love for his wife and children was unwavering, and that even when things seemed impossible, he somehow found a way to keep moving forward. But despite that strength, the challenges really never stopped coming, and earlier this month, another shocking blow hit this family, and it was something no one could have predicted. This incident took place in Stouffville, Ontario on Sunday, August 3rd, 2025. On this day, the Cristillos spent the afternoon at a family gathering, a bit of a drive away from their place. It wasn't too far or anything, but again, it was a bit of a trip and it would require some busy roads. And so they arrived there without a hitch, enjoyed the day in the family company, and then eventually they packed into their SUV and left their relative's place. Andrew took the driver's seat like he usually did, and the trip home began, which in the beginning went completely as expected. But at some point in this trip, something absolutely horrible happened. Another vehicle traveling at high speeds suddenly crossed into their path and struck the family's SUV head-on near Ballantrae. The head-on impact was sudden and it was absolutely catastrophic. Andrew would be immediately killed in the crash, and Christina and the kids would just barely make it through. Christina, who was already battling cancer, was still conscious and had one immediate task: to get her children out of the vehicle. Friends later described how she forced herself through the shattered windshield, using whatever strength she had left to get out, and said she also helped pull her daughters out to get them to safety. The kids were absolutely terrified and had no idea what was going on, screaming and presumably wanting their father as well, their amazing father who they'd never get to see again. 911 was called, and within minutes emergency crews were on scene. The young ones were rushed to Sick Kids Hospital and their injuries were serious. Medical professionals said there was trauma that would take months and years to heal, physically and emotionally. Christina was sent to the hospital as well, a place she was already unfortunately used to due to her cancer. And now there was another unimaginable struggle to face. And I just want to focus on how tough this woman is. She's already dealing with cancer, just got in an accident and managed to kick out the glass after a head-on collision and help pull her 3 kids out to safety. It's one thing hearing this, but you have to imagine being in this situation. The screams, the ringing ears, the love of your life beside you not making it through. Sometimes I just don't understand how life can be so cruel, and when we get to this next part, you'll understand why I was saying this made me very angry. The driver who caused the collision immediately fled the scene. Within the next hour, police found the driver who was allegedly responsible for this. Allegedly. Again, he had fled the crash scene but was located nearby and taken into custody. The man accused, 18-year-old Jaiwin Victor Kirubananthan from Oshawa, was charged with dangerous driving causing Andrew Cristillo's death, 3 counts of dangerous driving causing bodily harm, failing to remain at the scene of a fatal accident, and public mischief. Formal court proceedings began shortly after. For legal reasons, I have to state that the accused is presumed innocent as the legal process unfolds, but given some of the information you're about to hear, I think you can make up your own mind on whether or not this guy is innocent. Officers quickly learned that this guy had previously been charged for striking an Ontario Provincial Police cruiser that was transporting Premier Doug Ford's security detail on Highway 401 earlier this year. Doug Ford was in the car. For those who don't know, a premier here in Canada is essentially just our equivalent of a governor. There's differences, but yeah, we're not going to get into that. So in January of this same year, this dude was going over 200 kilometers an hour, recklessly driving, sideswiped a security detail holding our premier, was charged with dangerous driving, and somehow was able to be on the road again months later. And in this case, he was doing the same thing, driving like a maniac and cutting up in his ugly Supra. And now he takes a man away from a family who was already struggling with a cancer diagnosis and ruins the lives of many others in the family. As you can imagine, the public scrutiny has been immense. Why on earth did this kid still have a license? And it's stuff like this that gives our justice system here in Canada the reputation that it has. Whenever I see these misjustices, all I can think of is an Adam Smith quote that says, "Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent." And this is that exact quote in action. Now Christina is in the hospital too, recovering from both her injuries and continuing cancer treatment. The girls are receiving care, getting back to normal physical shape, but this time without their beloved dad guiding them. The home they'll return to, whenever they get there, will bear his absence in every corner, and dad just won't be there anymore. Their amazing relatives are coordinating legal support, medical follow-ups, and emotional support for 3 very young hearts that still don't fully understand what is even going on. And perhaps the worst thing I heard while doing this research is something that came from Andrew's brother regarding the 7-year-old girl. He said, "Leah has a cast that she saved a spot for daddy to sign, but he won't be able to do that now." It's unlikely that at their young ages they truly understand the severity of what happened, and I can't even begin to imagine what lies ahead for this family, but my heart is with them, and if there's anyone who can get through this, it is Christina. This never had to happen, and it should not have happened, and I truly would not be surprised if this kid was out on the road again in 6 months. Like, I'm not even kidding. I don't understand why these things happen to people or families who are already struggling. I mean, I'm very, very happy in life, but I would trade places with Andrew just so his children could have his support. Why is it that the people who are needed the most are the ones that go through this? This actually really reminds me of the case of the Cristillo family that I covered in volume 26, where a woman and her 3 daughters were killed by some guy recklessly driving a G35. Imagine what that father has gone through, having his entire life, his wife and his 3 girls, taken away at the hands of some moron. And now, just 20-something days later, the completely distraught Cristillo family is doing their best to get through this horror, and seeing Andrew's brother speak about it just shows how much this has taken out of them.
She had to kick her way out of the windshield and try to pull these girls, one by one, out of the car on her own, while they're calling for help from their daddy.
The family is also pushing for change, proposing what they call Andrew's Law, which serves 3 essential purposes: mandatory driving bans for individuals charged with dangerous driving, life sentences or charges equivalent to murder when dangerous driving results in the loss of life, and legislative reform in Ontario's Highway Traffic Act to mandate lifetime driving bans for extreme dangerous driving, such as stunt driving at excessive rates of speed or causing collisions while reckless or impaired. I'm going to be linking their GoFundMe, which has already smashed its goal, and a link to the petition to get their proposed law implemented, although if you're not in Ontario, I don't think there's any point in signing this because they review everything later. Though they aren't too far from me, I don't know this family personally or anything, but I signed the petition and donated a substantial amount because this case really bothered me. Even though they have smashed their goal, I really want to see this family win as much as possible. Rest in peace to Andrew Cristillo, and I'll keep Christina and the girls in my prayers. And one last thing, guys, I cover a lot of shit, okay? I've seen every fucking thing you can possibly imagine, but this one has just been really difficult for me. I was choking up recording it. I don't know if you could tell. Of course, I do multiple takes, but still, I don't know. This one there's something about it, especially when there's children involved, and they're the ones who bear the pain of it. It just really, really upsets me. So I'm just realizing this, but this entry actually takes place exactly 10 years ago to the day, as of the date of me recording this. You guys will hear it a few days later. It was a weekend of August 22nd, 2015, and in West Sussex, England, a once well-loved annual tradition was bringing thousands of people together, the Shoreham Airshow. This show, unsurprisingly, took place near Shoreham Airport, which is a small airfield in the south of England, just a few miles from the coast. And by 2015, this airshow had been going on for just over 25 years. The first one was in 1989. The show had a pretty big focus on vintage aircraft. There were very notable World War II airplanes and even many that were older, but there were some modern jets mixed in as well. At the show, the pilots carried out aerobatic maneuvers, which for many enthusiasts and families alike, seeing them do this was very exhilarating. If you've been to an airshow, you know what I mean. Even for those who weren't particularly into aviation, it was still a special day out, with kids on their parents' shoulders seeking a memorable experience, and friends enjoying the nice weather and getting some good food. The roads nearby were just as busy as the show itself. The A27, a major route through Sussex, runs right past the airport, and that Saturday was full of drivers heading to their weekend plans, whether that be football matches, work, visiting family, or something else. And honestly, most of them probably weren't even thinking about the airshow that was happening nearby until they saw the odd plane in the sky while they were out. At around 1:20 in the afternoon, the show was well underway and folks were having a great time. One of the highlights that day was a Hawker Hunter T-7, a jet fighter from the 1950s once used by the Royal Air Force. The pilot was a man named Andy Hill, who himself was an experienced former Royal Air Force and British Airways pilot. Suffice to say, he had performed displays like this many times before. And so when the Hunter taxied out and lined up for its routine, spectators expected a display full of big maneuvers and vintage beauty. In the beginning, that's exactly what they got. The weather was clear and the jet sequence started normally. It got ready, took off, and made passes over the airfield before beginning a move known as a loop. Spectators watched as the aircraft climbed steeply, curving upward into the sky, and initially this looked like any other display, but as the Hunter reached the top of the loop, something seemed off. People present who had seen countless airshows before were quoted as saying that the jet looked low, or at least much lower than expected for that type of maneuver, and they were correct. We have plenty of footage to prove this. The loop continued with Andy trying to complete the full rotation, but in a matter of seconds, everything changed. Instead of leveling out safely, the jet just kept descending, and not just fast, but at the wrong angle as well. At 1:22 p.m., the jet came down just beyond the airport boundary, directly striking the very busy road, the A27. The impact and explosion sent a fireball and black smoke towering over the route, and witnesses were stunned. People who had been cheering seconds before were now in a full-blown panic, and many people, even outside of the airshow, caught this on camera. There is quite a bit of footage of this crash happening, and that's part of what made me want to cover this. I know it's not completely unknown or anything, but they just show you how bad this was. Emergency crews arrived within minutes to scenes that responders later described as like a war zone. Cars were on fire, wreckage was scattered across the tarmac, and unfortunately in this case, the cost of life was fairly high. The community would later learn that 11 lives were lost and 15 more were injured. These people were simply just on the road below when the aircraft hit. Among them were 2 young footballers heading to a match, A 76-year-old chauffeur on his way to pick up a bride in his limo. There were cyclists and everyday people who just never made it to their plans that day. It really is absolutely gutting. The pilot, Andy Hill, survived the crash despite not intentionally ejecting from the aircraft before it. The seat was armed, but there's no evidence that he actually pulled the handle. Investigators believe the massive impact forces caused a partial activation of the ejection system as the jet broke apart. And so Hill was thrown from the cockpit still strapped into his seat, which was live at the time and created extra danger for emergency crews. Basically, even though he got tossed out, he could still be ejected from this seat if things were handled correctly. Or at least that's how I interpreted this. Andy Hill did survive, albeit with major injuries. He was put into a medically induced coma upon arrival to the hospital, but eventually he did pull through. His consequences didn't end there though, and we'll get to that shortly, but I just want to finish explaining the event itself. People who were there never forgot what they saw. One witness later said, "We saw things no one should ever have to see." Another described it as the most horrific thing they'd ever witnessed, saying the images in their head still haunt them all these years later. Just to give an idea of how bad this must have been to be unseen for, some family members of the deceased had to get the horrible news that it was unlikely any of their relatives' remains would ever be found. The Shoreham Airshow was immediately cancelled and the investigation began. The Air Accidents Investigation Branch found that the aircraft had entered the loop too low and too slow to recover. And an escape maneuver, something pilots are trained to do, was not performed in time. But as the investigation unfolded, the focus wasn't just on the pilot's actions. People wondered how these displays were authorized. Why were high-risk maneuvers happening outside of airfield boundaries, directly on top of such a busy route? Public safety concerns were understandably a big part of this. As I touched on before, for Andy Hill, the consequences didn't end at the crash. He was seriously injured but survived and eventually faced one of the most high-profile legal battles in British aviation history. In 2018, he was charged with 11 counts of gross negligence manslaughter. Prosecutors argued that he had failed to fly safely, ignored minimum height and speed requirements, and made catastrophic errors. His defense team maintained that he had no memory of the crash and may have experienced cognitive impairment from G-force effects. And so the trial took place at the Old Bailey in 2019. Families of the victims sat through weeks of evidence and listening to expert testimony, and in March of that year, the jury finally returned a verdict. Not guilty on all charges. As you could imagine, this was a devastating outcome for many, many people. Inquests were held after this, and in December 2022, a coroner concluded that the 11 victims were unlawfully killed and identified serious failings, including incorrect maneuvers and systematic issues in airshow oversight. That ruling brought some sense of accountability, but again, no one was ever criminally convicted, and Andy Hill continues to vehemently defend himself. He's even tried to have his pilot's license reinstated as recently as May 2025, but his requests were denied. Today, a memorial near the River Adur bears the names of those lost. Every year, families in the community gather to remember their loved ones. The Shoreham Airshow has not happened since, and as of the release of this video, it's been exactly 10 years and 2 days since this tragedy happened. Rest in peace to all of the innocent people who lost their lives in this tragic disaster, and my heart is with their families.